Well, this is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. First, though, tonight, our top stories. Syrian forces, backed by Russian military power, are closing in on the last opposition stronghold of Idlib. 900,000 people have fled their homes to escape the bombing and the shelling. In Germany, a gunman shot dead 9 people before killing himself in an attack that is being described as domestic terrorism. And the Labour leader has criticised Boris Johnson for not visiting flood-affected communities. Jeremy Corbyn's comments came as he saw the flood damage in Pontypridd in South Wales. Well, hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. In the next half hour, then, we will see what's making the headlines with the Observer's chief leader writer, Sonia Sodha, and the FT's Whitehall correspondent, Sebastian Payne. Great to see you both. Hello to you.
Good evening.
So as ever, let's check out the front pages. The Daily Telegraph carries a picture of the vigil for victims of the attack in Germany. It leads, though, with a story about coal fires being banned in an effort to cut emissions. The Times features a story about a Home Office report and racism on its front cover, alongside a photo of the man charged over the London mosque attack today. The Metro leads with today's stabbing at a mosque in London with the headline, Mosque Knifing Terror. The Guardian's main story is about Airbnbs taking over cities and towns, leaving some communities short of housing for people. It also has a photograph of the vigil for attack victims in Germany. The Daily Mirror has the headline, Dame Julie, My Cancer Ordeal, in relation to Julie Walters' battle with colon cancer. The Financial Times reporting that the American bank Morgan Stanley has acquired the online trading platform E-Trade. So Sonia and Sebastian are here. More people obviously still coming in. But you want to start with the Metro and what happened at this mosque today.
So a really sad story. We're not very clear actually on all the details yet. I think it's important to say because it happened kind of so recently. What it appears happened was a man at a mosque, the London Central Mosque. He tried to attack the imam. Instead, he ended up attacking another man and kind of seriously wounded him. Apparently, his injuries aren't life-threatening, but they are very serious. He's been rushed to hospital. And obviously, this is happening in a climate where people are worried about terrorism. We've just seen the dreadful attack that's happened in Germany. We think that that was far-right terrorism. It's too early to know exactly what this is yet. And in fact, some sources have suggested that the man responsible for this may himself have been Muslim, an Albanian or Bosnian Muslim. It's not quite clear.
And they have attended the mosque as well.
They may have attended the mosque. Some people at the mosque say they may have seen him before. Apparently there may have been mental health issues involved. So it's not yet clear exactly what this is. But obviously, Muslims, this happens in a place of worship, people at their sort of daily prayers, and the sort of climate in which it's happening, I think, will make Muslims feel very kind of worried about these sorts of attacks, and particularly after, some of the attacks we've seen, from Finsbury Park, for example, a couple of years ago. This definitely kind of doesn't help that thing.
It is still amazing that everything gets filmed. So you have photographs of all of it, don't you? The Daily Telegraph, too, saying that Muslims are asking for more security in the light of what happened.
Yes, we're just picking up on what Sonia said there. There's some reporting on the Telegraph's front page with Whitehall sources saying that mental health issues were likely to be a factor of this compared to the German terror attack, which was very much a far-right neo-Nazi attack that happened yesterday evening. But this is something that I know the Muslim community in Britain has asked for quite a long time here, because we know the security services are consistently picking up on these far-right plots. And it's very difficult to stop the lone wolf. And this is the thing that worries the Met, worries MI5 so much, because, tracking one terrorist often takes 12 people to do that. And when they look at all the hundreds of plots they're consistently trying to foil and people they're trying to track, they just don't have the manpower to absolutely do everything. If you remember me back to the Westminster Bridge attack, which has a lot of similarities, the talk of mental health issues, someone who was a Muslim themselves and someone who was acting as a lone wolf, the challenge with that was, it's always, can the security services have done more? The answer is, well, probably not, in fact. But I think this idea that mosques need better protection is one that probably will pick up currency here. But you have to feel very sorry, mosques, it's, you know, such a sacred place for people worshipping there. It's one of the worst possible things you could absolutely imagine. So I think the Muslim community in London will be very much on edge at this evening, combined with what happened in Germany as well. Just, you know, it does remind us this threat is absolutely constant. They can't all be stopped all the time, and it's just a fact of life, sadly.
Yes. Let's go back to the main page on the Daily Telegraph, because that shows the vigil, doesn't it, for the victims of the attack in Germany. Angela Merkel certainly talks about the threat of racism that exists in Germany, a real fear, possibly, about Germany stepping again towards the far right with the history. And obviously, that was the country that took the most Syrian Iraqi refugees, didn't it, a few years ago, which, you know, some communities perhaps possibly suggesting that they are feeling overwhelmed by the numbers.
Germany has such a confused picture on this whole thing, because you've got, as you said, the infamous million migrants that were taken, and I think in the longer history trends that Merkel will be treated well from that, but the immediate integration of those into German society and community has undoubtedly caused problems. And I think one thing you see as part of that is the rise of the AfD, which is a far-right party. You know, it's the first far-right party to have political representation in Germany in 7 decades. And the fact that they've risen so quickly and rapidly in local state elections, but also in the Bundestag as well, does show that Germany does have some big societal issues there. And I think this kind of attack very much does speak to that.
I think it is important to keep it in perspective, though, when you look at the number of refugees that European countries have taken over the last few years from, you know, conflict zones like Iraq and Syria. It's actually a sort of a tiny proportion of refugees that states around Iraq and Syria, states like Turkey, for example, have taken in, Lebanon. And actually, when you look at how big our populations are, again, it's kind of a very, very small number. Obviously, sometimes it can be visible if people are all being housed in one place. So I would be kind of cautious about, you know, I think we really have to keep it in perspective. And if anything, I think we should be doing more, not less. And there are certainly countries that have taken even more than Germany within Europe and haven't suffered from these problems. I think also, you know, picking up on what Seb said about the changing nature of terrorism, I think that is quite important to note as well. So the days of very sort of large-scale orchestrated attacks that involved, you know, lots of cells, the sorts of attacks inspired by a terrorist organisation like Al-Qaeda, they seem to have moved on, and an organisation like ISIS seems to rely much more on inspiring single actors, where actually there won't be lots of communication about it. It will be literally
propaganda online,
propaganda and being inspired by it to act, and acting alone, which again makes it much more difficult for the police to track these things, because often the way they sort of manage to thwart these plots is by coming across intelligence, as well as having individuals under surveillance.
Yes.
So I think that's one of the things that is making it more, not less difficult.
Yeah.
Indeed, and they sort of have to try and go to the heart of it in terms of the ideology and the indoctrination that creates this path that people go down to lead them to do these horrific acts here. And again, that's a much longer term thing. I think that does worry the police and security services.
Yeah, and the pressures in countries like Syria continue. Our coverage
Absolutely.
today from Idlib, people are moving towards a closed Turkish border. It's very, you know, depressing and devastating for so many people. Let's go to the Times, shall we? A kind of related story. Home Office is racist, says this report into the so-called Windrush generation. We haven't yet got that report, though, have we?
So this is a quite extraordinary leak from the inquiry here. So if we recall, the whole Windrush scandal happened in 2018, and it really began when it revealed that children of the Windrush generation who came to the UK in the 50s were being deported unjustly due to basically a big institutional mess up by the Home Office, which was completely lost track of paperwork. And the question was, what was behind this? Was it a policy failure? Was it a pragmatic operational failure? And this report, which was done by Wendy Williams, which is said to be independent, and we were discussing, I'm not sure where that sits within Whitehall, but it's definitely independent of politicians, has looked into this. And what it has concluded is that the Home Office was institutionally rated over that hostile environment policy towards migrants. The hostile environment was put forward by Theresa May when she was Home Secretary to try and limit illegal migration, but too often its effects spilled over into legal migration, and that creates very much fed into the Windrush thing. What's interesting in this to put in the context of the Home Office going through a very rough patch. If we think, 10 years ago when John Reid was Home Secretary and said the whole thing is not fit for purpose, it needs to be shut down. We're almost back to that, where you've got the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, in a public slanging match with her permanent secretary, Sir Philip Rutman. You've got this report here, and we shouldn't forget the Home Office is at the centre of the future of this country. At the end of this year, it's got to produce this whole new migration system, border checks, customs checks, security checks when we leave the EU. And so far, it's one of those things that everything seems to be going wrong for it. So if I was Boris Johnson reading this kind of report, it would really make me incredibly worried.
But I think we shouldn't forget that actually the hostile environment was very much a political policy. So it wasn't just a matter of implementation. It was something very close to Theresa May that she really pushed. And it's not a surprise to me that the original version of this report, it's now said to have been watered down, but it's not a surprise that the original version of the report concluded that the Home Office is institutionally racist. Because if you look at the definition of institutional racism under the Macpherson inquiry, which looked into the Met and Stephen Lawrence's death, what it said was that an organisation is institutionally racist if people of different races or ethnicities get treated differently by processes, by the system. There's absolutely no question that the Windrush policy, the government's Windrush policy, it saw people who've lived in Britain all their lives, legally, paid taxes, refused care from the NHS, deported illegally sometimes, so really, really problematic. And a couple of years ago, people appealed another of the Home Office's hostile environment policies called Right to Rent, which is about landlords being asked to do checks on people who come to rent homes from them. And the High Court found that that policy was racially discriminatory, because what it ended up in was landlords, if you've got, if your skin's a different colour or if you've got a different sounding name, landlords asking you for documentation to prove that you've got the right to live in the UK that they wouldn't ask somebody who looks European, say. So it's, this report would not be the first report to say that the government's hostile environment policy is institutionally racist. The court.
I need to move on, Sebastian. And just very quickly, the Telegraph as well. Let's just show you the Priti Patel story, which is on the front there. I was just going to say she's obviously survived the recent reshuffle, so she's there to stay, isn't she?
Yes.
It's not great policy, is it? I'm not sure
No,
anyway.
Indeed.
Yes,
I was going to say just very quickly that I think you do have to have this line, because the hostile environment was not meant to target people who should be here. The Windrush generation were unfairly targeted.
As a matter of policy, the right to rent policy did, and that's what the High Court found.
Sure,
I was incredibly important, really.
We won't have long on the way back. Okay, Priti Patel, very quickly.
Patel, very quickly. The Home Secretary is being in a big row with some of her senior civil servants. People are very annoyed. People are leaking lots of comments, briefing against each other. This one will not end well.
Okay, interesting. Right. So, do you live in one of those areas where a quarter of all properties are listed on Airbnb? Find out next. Well, welcome back. You're watching the press preview. With me this evening, Sonia Sodha and Sebastian Payne. Welcome back to both of you. Labour leadership, obviously, still ongoing. Tony Blair has waded in and said what?
Well, he's celebrating the 120th anniversary of the Labour Party being founded, and is saying in that 120 years there's only been 2 leaders born who won elections. One is Howard Wilson, who's long passed away, and the other is Tony Blair. But what was actually interesting from the former PM was that he did have the self-awareness to say, look, people probably don't want to hear from me, but I'm going to make my peace anyway. And I thought there was one quote that he said that's worth listening to, which is, he said, Labour's aim is not to trend on Twitter or to have celebrities temporarily, by the way, fawn over it. Our task is to win power, to get our hands stuck in the muddy wrangle of governing where we can be pulled up in the prize of progress. I thought that was such a good line. And people will say, oh, it's Blair, Iraq, he's awful, dreadful, he's basically a Tory. The fact is, he did win 3 elections. Labour is so far away from winning where he was when he was leader. They should listen to him, and I'm very much of the view Labour will not come anywhere near winning an election until it learns to love Tony Blair again.
Interesting. I think he definitely deserves to be listened to. He won 3 elections, as Seb has just said. Moving on to, should we move on to the next, just because
For time pressures, right? Which is the areas in Britain with one Airbnb for every 4 homes in The Guardian. This is an extraordinary figure, isn't it?
Absolutely. So it's exclusive from my Guardian colleagues. So some areas of the country, it's 1 in 4, 1 in 5 homes in the area are being listed on Airbnb. And I think there'll be a lot of people, it's a lot of areas where there are second homes, etc. There are a lot of people who'll be quite concerned about this, because obviously if you've got a high number of short-term lets, that dries up rents. It makes it harder for people who live locally to get an affordable rent on their house. And, you know, Airbnb, I think, look, for lots of us, it's a brilliant convenience. It's great being able to rent a nice flat or home with your friends, wherever you're going on holiday. But it does have a real impact, I think, on local housing markets. And Barcelona, as a city, have been incredibly concerned about this. They sought to ban Airbnb because of the number of short-term lets driving up rents for local people. So I think this is a...
yes, or just some places that we teased, didn't we? So Edinburgh Old Town.
Yep, so 29% of homes in Edinburgh Old Town are listed on Airbnb, 25% in North West Skye, and in England we've got areas, so there are some areas in Devon where it's 1 in 4, in the Lake District, so all of these kind of holiday hotspots that you might expect, but it's pricing out local.
We should just to look at the other context of it as well, because in places like Edinburgh Old Town, that is an acute spot that's known to be very bad. There is the point as well, you've got to put it, you know, when you have houses that don't necessarily affect the local housing stock. You know, I think city centres are a big problem for Airbnb, but wider field
because it's
may
grim,
not be.
as you know, and there's more flooding. Anyway, we will see you at 11:30 for more. Thank you very much indeed. Let's check out the weather.